Jim, let's get another question here. This one was sent via the Cult of Cornette Facebook group by Leonard Hayhurst. Jim did commentary on Superstars in 1997 with Jim Ross, as that show was limping to a close. It was once the flagship WWF show. What does Jim remember of how the show was being treated at the time, and did they know the last episode was going to be the last episode in advance?
I don't remember about that because at the point of 1997, they were concentrating on Raw and on cable, and they still had TV syndication on the local stations, but it was less important than it had been previously because, as I said, they were putting all their eggs in the Raw basket. And syndication still existed to have the presence on local television so they could put in the local promos for when they came to Louisville or St. Louis or wherever the case may be. And WWF Superstars, as he mentioned, was the flagship. And what was it? It was Superstars was the A syndicated show. Was it then?
It was Superstars.
Where was Wrestling Challenge?
Superstars and Wrestling Challenge. Wrestling Challenge was B, and like in New York, Superstars aired on Saturday with Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura, previously Bruno Sammartino, on there too. And then Sunday was Challenge with Monsoon and Heenan.
Right. And then they ended up with another syndicated show for a while there, but point being, in the early 2000s, they finally limped out, but the shows were still there. But what they did was they shot at one point before they went to live Raw every week. You would do a pay-per-view on Sunday. Then on Monday, you would tape 4 one-hour Raw episodes in some building. In Tuesday, you would tape 4 Superstars of Wrestling 1-hour syndicated shows in some other arena. And then Wednesday, you would do 4 episodes of Wrestling Challenge. And around that, you would also do the Coliseum home video exclusives and other shit, right? Well, then, as things started gradually switching, because that was hard enough to keep track of, and you were doing entire months of TV at a time, then the syndicated shows started becoming less important on their own, and they were shot around the big tapings. So let's say you did a live 2-hour Raw on Monday, you do syndicated TV matches around it. And a taped 2-hour Raw for the following week on Tuesday, and you do other syndicated matches around it. So the bottom line is they put these things together in post just with matches, and they'd plug in the interviews and they'd get it ready. And then JR and I, or whoever the announcers were, would go to the studio and voice the thing over like we were there in the arena. And that's why you would get on cameras with the announcers in one of the earlier matches. The cameras would come over and just catch the announcers sitting at ringside for a cutaway. Or you might do one little billboard spot just to prove you were in the arena. And then you'd go sit in the fucking back and they'd shoot the rest of the stuff and then you'd do it in post. And that also led to problems when people weren't available and you had to switch announcers. You had to, the other announcer sitting across the ring in some of the shots. And obviously he wasn't doing any of the talking. But I liked that because I liked doing announcing. And with JR, it was so easy. So whatever morning it was, if it was Thursday morning, we would be at the studio at like 10 o'clock and we'd voice over Superstars, and then we'd take a 15-minute break, and then we would do, goddamn, the other show we were doing at the time, which might have been International Heat, or might have been WWF New York, or might have been whatever, but we did 2 shows every week for a while that were in syndication somewhere. And that was the easiest part of my fucking week. If I did it with somebody else that wasn't Jim Ross, then they always constantly had to stop and fucking pick up a line or go back or whatever. And it took for fucking ever. And I mentioned when I was doing rehearsals with Shane. And later on, I did some on air stuff with Shane on these syndicated. It would take 3-4 hours. But JR and I could sit down and just say, roll the fucking tape. And we would call it live and we'd do the show in 45 minutes. And the only time that Jennifer Good was our producer, the only time that she would stop us is if I accidentally said wrestling. And then she'd say, substitute something else. So I'd go back and weave my way around it without ever, I believe I mentioned, I never said the phrase sports entertainment on television the whole time I worked for the WWF. Never, ever. But otherwise than that, it was nice and easy. With other people, it was somewhat of a chore. But that's what we did, and then they just sent it out everywhere. So by then, there was not a lot of thought being put into those shows.
At that point, were they still doing the thing where the commentators would have like a pause and they would put Howard Finkel in to announce the local dates?
No, they'd quit doing that by that point because they did that. They did that in the era where I believe they didn't have as much commercial time or as much commercial leeway in the programs as they did in later years. Because to tell people what you're talking about, a match would start on the show and then suddenly the announcers would lay out, and that way Finkel could come in and do a voiceover saying, and World Wrestling Federation action returns to Poughkeepsie at the Mid-Hudson Civic Center on Saturday, November 12th, with all the top stars and blah, blah, blah. Do a 60-second plug and then get out and you'd pick up the announcing again. But by this point in time, I think the commercial time and regulations were so relaxed that they were just spotting the thing to death in the course of the program.